I'm here with Jake West, writer, director, producer, and editor of the vampire feature film Razorblade Smile, which hit movie theaters around the same time Buffy began slaying on TV. Now it's been remastered to ultra-high def along with 9 hours of bonus extras. Jake is a fascinating creator, and I think you'll find our chat really entertaining. Since Jake and I spoke, a movie he's directing called White with Kate Beckinsale has been greenlit. He starts helming that soon. And now, part 2. I want to come back to the release, but I want to ask you first, did you always know that it was going to be told from Lilith's POV?
Yeah, because when I was doing the script, the idea that really struck me was this whole thing about if I was a modern vampire, what the question I asked myself as a writer, if I was a modern vampire, what would I do? How would I live? And that question was kind of like, okay, well, I can't reveal that I'm a vampire, but obviously I like dressing a certain way. I like being around a certain type of person and having fun. Once I come to that idea that it would be a great job for a vampire to have as an assassin, then I kind of just reversed engineered it from there. But the other thing about the script, which is really important, is about her learning to be a vampire. And because I wanted to express her learning to be a vampire, it felt very much that a voiceover from her point of view was going to really make that work. Because I always wanted, in all of the films I grew up loving, the one thing that I always used to be disappointed by is just that the vampires, they were always the villains and they always got defeated at the end. And there was this kind of moral compass inbuilt in these things. And me being a little bit more immoral, I thought it'd be good to get that moral compass, screw it up and throw it away, and make the vampire the kind of from their perspective. And I guess I probably was subliminally influenced by Interview with the Vampire, having the narrative being told, but she's not telling it to somebody else who's recording it. She's actually telling you what she feels like. And as I was writing the script, at the beginning, there's a line which a lot of people really love in the film. It's where Lilith says at the beginning of the film, you think all about vampires, believe me, you know, fuck all. And when I wrote that, it made me chuckle, it made me smile, because I thought, okay, this is a really fun challenge to the audience. And because I was hanging out with people who are in the vampire scene, and everyone always, at the vampire groups, everyone had an opinion that they knew the most about vampires. And so all of that stuff really fed in, and I thought that was really funny. So all of that kind of sort of combined and condensed into me thinking that would be a great idea. So writing it from her perspective gave me a chance to educate people about the different aspects of vampirism that had affected her. And also it gave it a real sense of fun, and it allowed me to sort of do it at a slightly meta level where I could critique certain things in the vampire mythos, like turning into mist, turning into bats, sunlight, all of these things, and actually have a chance to explain some of these things, like some of the misconceptions, like in Bram Stoker's Dracula can walk around in the day. It just is less powerful. But that's in the Dracula book. But most people think, oh no vampire can go in sunlight, they'll just burn up. But that's because of Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, because that was invented in 1920s in that movie. And it was something which always struck me as being really interesting. So playing around with vampire lore, and there hadn't been a proper vampire film made in the UK for at least over 20 years by that point. So it was a chance to just be really playful with it. And I know that's something nowadays which is done all the time. And certainly something which Buffy then took and also had an absolute ball with. And certainly you had more money, and you had like 7 years or so to keep on developing. I only had one movie and I was only 26 and had hardly any money, but I wanted to have fun with the vampire mythos. And it's kind of fun to sort of play around with it. And I think Razorblade was one of the first films, certainly in the 90s, that was doing that. And I think subsequently, most movies after that started playing around with it. I'm not saying I invented it, but I certainly feel I was one of the first people to really play around with it. But we were playing around with it as much as anything because I love vampire films and vampire literature and mythology. So it also was a bit of a fun game for me just to explore that and also try and make certain things work for our budget.
How did Eileen develop that specific, soothing way of speaking as Lilith?
Yeah, well, Eileen, like I say, if you meet her in real life, she doesn't sound anything like Lilith Silver. And a lot of people, when they meet her, they kind of want her to be like Lilith Silver. She's not. She's like, Jake, all right, she's an absolute ball and bundle of energy. But the way she looks, and Eileen, when she played Lilith Silver, I think she was like about 29 or 30, something like that. And she looked absolutely perfect. I mean, her look at that period, she was just sort of like visually just perfect as a vampire. So she had that face, but her natural personality is very jokey, very silly, very kind of laughing and giggly and scatty. So I said to Eileen, look, we've really got to you've got to bring this all down and you've got to really enjoy this character. So the idea is because at the beginning of the film, you see when she's trying to stop the duel from happening because her lover's going to be shot by Stephen Blake. We see that she's riding a horse and she's obviously part of a society. She's quite well off for that time period to be educated and to have a horse and to be well dressed. It meant she came from money. The thinking was with Eileen was like, well, she has to have had an education. So at that point, being British, as you would know, the kind of RP, that kind of received pronunciation accent kind of delivery was very much something that also harkened back to, I guess, all of the Hammer horror films. And even though Christopher Lee is supposed to be Transylvanian, he never tries a Transylvanian accent, does he? So that was something that came later, I suppose, with Gary Oldman and subsequent kind of incarnations of that kind of thing. But I guess sort of cinematically, we were used to vampires being kind of British and well-spoken. So all of that stuff fed into, I think, how she wanted to do that. Once you kind of got Eileen's excitement down and she kind of held it in more, and she slowed her natural exuberance, she had that voice and she really sort of began to find it rather delicious. And so once again, I mean, Eileen wasn't a trained actress. She came from modeling. And pop promos and stuff like that. She got into acting and then she started doing some courses, but she wasn't a trained actress. But the fact that she did feel more like a real vampire in real life, and she is this larger than life personality. And I think she brought those things to Lilith. And that certainly, I think she nailed the voice and she had fun with it. It is a little bit over the top and a little bit camp, but I guess the film is.
It's so different than her natural speaking voice. And that
have you ever spoken to Eileen? Have you met her?
I've seen interviews with her.
Yeah, because she is. Yeah, she's just a riot. I was with her yesterday at the Romford Horror Film Festival, but she's got one of her new films playing. It played today, in fact, called She's a Bitch. But Eileen's real personality is just like I say, her real personality is the opposite of Lilith. So she did a really good job because if you meet her in real life, she's not like that.
Yeah.
But also, everyone kind of wants her to be like that as well because there's something very, very kind of delicious about Lilith and her voice.
Very enticing.
You're one of the vampire actresses who also did an incredible something with like Drusilla's voice. You brought that dreamy craziness, that thing like she's got one foot in another world, and you brought that kind of sense of madness, but you put it alive beautifully vocally. So you're somebody that obviously gave a lot back in that way to vampire acting.
Oh, thank you. How did you work with Richard Wells on the score?
I was very lucky. When I was working as an editor, the company I was working for, Maverick Media, they started doing a lot of work for video games, which were becoming more and more popular. You had like PCs and PlayStation 1, and companies were merging that were beginning to put more and more money into both developing the games and advertising them. There's a company called the Bitmap Brothers who did a lot of great games like Speedball, and they did a game called Zed. And they came to us because we were kind of young and kind of cool. We weren't like a normal kind of company. We were a bit more kind of rock and roll. And they know us as a filmmaker, so they asked if we could do some storyboards for the cutscenes for the game. So they wanted it to be more directed and edited, so because they didn't come from that discipline of filmmaking. And then that carried on. Warner Brothers had a division called Warner Interactive in the UK, and they were doing a strategy-based war game called Missing in Action, or MIA, as it was released at. And they wanted filmed cutscenes. They actually wanted them to be filmed to go between the game missions. So you get a video briefing, and it was like a strategy Vietnam-based war game. So we recreated like the bits of Vietnam sets and things like that. And we cast all these actors. In fact, there's a bit where Eileen is even in it, in a kind of homage to the Apocalypse Now, the bit when the Playboy bunnies come along. They've got her and her mate, and she was stripping at the time as well. So she was like that kind of girl. So we did a scene where Eileen's actually in there as one of these kind of Playboy type strippers who's helicoptered in. So I got to shoot and direct that stuff and edited it all. And when we were looking for music for both of those Project Z and MIA, there was a guy whose music we had heard and we really loved, this guy called Richard Wells. So I went to meet Richard and we got on really, really well. And he did such fantastic music for this stuff. And he was then doing stuff for us for different promo work. And literally, I became friends with Richard because of that. And when I did Razorblade Smile, he was like the musician I'd worked with, and I knew who was going to be able to rise to the challenge. And because I just loved what he had done on the stuff that we'd done, it was just like a dream come true to get him involved. And because he was young and he was really excited, obviously he was scared. He was freaked out. I mean, I've got to do a feature film score. He'd never done this before. Like he says, when he's interviewed, he hadn't done any music longer than 4 minutes by that point, probably in his life. But he really rose to the challenge, and I loved the way that he works. And so we talked about it, and I was saying, well, look, she's a vampire assassin, and I kind of always, like, larger than life, I always wanted her to be a bit of a vampire James Bond, and that's why you've got that kind of opening James Bond style sequence, which I always love those James Bond sequences. I thought it would just be fun to do that. And it was actually something that we just did in like about a couple of hours against a bit tatty old bit of blue screen. And then fortunately, when we had the money from manga, we had the money to finish it off and composite that stuff in at Cinesites. But it was actually, I just shot it thinking it'd be nice to do something like that. And in the end, we got to do it.
The end, too, the shootout on the rocks has a Bond vibe, too. So you sort of bookend the movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely wanted that action feeling. So when I was speaking to Richard, I said, one of the things I said to him is kind of like think of her as a vampire James Bond. And I said to him, it'd be great if we could have a theme, like the Bond theme, have a theme tune for Lilith. And he said, oh, yeah, that's really cool. And he developed this music. And I remember he brought over this early version of it, and he played it. I thought, that's fucking brilliant. It's like, it gave Lilith this musical identity. Then he could rework it, and like all throughout the score, he reworks her theme. And so it comes in a different way, whether it's on keyboards or piano or guitar. And so that way we could change the vibe, but you kept on having this repeating motif for Lilith. And he also did a theme for Sephane as well. Chris Adamson's character also has his own theme as well, which comes in and out. And it was a beautiful way of doing it. And I think he's written a fantastic score. I mean, I love that score because it has got this theme to it. And yeah, and that's the first time he had written a film score. And he was sort of inspired by the visuals, and he didn't know he could do it. And once again, the equipment he was working on was so basic. I mean, he had a computer. He had like a professional-ish VHS deck, which had a audio time code out. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but you would have an audio time code out, which he would feed into his computer, which was, I think, an early Mac. And the time code would lock the sync with the video, but with the VHS. He would have a time-coded VHS tape with numbers on it, but it was 25 frames a second, so the sync wouldn't always be perfect, but that's how he would run it backwards and forwards. So he was scoring off a VHS tape on a tiny little TV. It was crazy. It's just, that's how you did things then, certainly when we didn't have any money, and we didn't really know how to do it. And he got a friend of his who's a good guitarist, a guy called Fly Garrick, who came in and laid some really cool guitar stuff in. And but most of it was just Richard. He played everything in on the keyboards and samples, and he gave it this wonderful orchestral feel and stuff like that. And it's a magnificent score. So I just, once again, I couldn't believe my luck when he delivered that.
What does the title Razorblade Smile mean to you? Why did you choose it?
Well, for me, I was just looking for a really, really cool title. And it takes a while to, as you're writing, to find out what the film is. And the film, to me, was about a vampire. Like I say, she's beginning to enjoy and understand what being a vampire is. And one of the last things she says in the film is that she complains about the problem with humans is that they just don't smile enough. And that line, humans just don't smile enough, is like, well, if you look at a vampire and they open their mouth and they've got their fangs and they're smiling at you, their smile is sharp. So you're seeing something which is kind of dangerous and sharp. And I thought, wow, their fangs almost so that would be what's sharp. A razor blade is sharp. And I thought, God, a razor blade smile. And it's not a term that I'd known. And subsequently, I believe there's a band now called Razor Blade Smile. And there's another musician that has recently, they called their whole album Razor Blade Smile. I'm assuming they may know the film. If not, if they just do one Google search, they will. But prior to that, I've never seen the words Razor Blade Smile as a thing. Now, some people mistook it as an idea of a Glaswegian smile, when in Glasgow, where somebody attacks with a knife, they would cut somebody's lips, the kind of jokery type thing. But that's not a razor blade smile for me. The razor blade smile was the idea when the vampire opens their mouth and they're laughing, you see that they look dangerous. So, but also the fact that they're smiling and laughing and having fun. And that's, to me, why it became the perfect title, because it actually encapsulated the story, but it looks great when you put it as 3 words. And as a title, I thought, yeah, this sounds like a proper movie title, and it's interesting. And then came up with the tagline, part seductress, part assassin, all vampire. And the whole thing just tied together. And because I'd worked a lot doing like trailers and campaigns and stuff like that, I was just looking for something that would enmesh. So when I hit her on Razorblade Smile, it was during the writing process, and I went through different titles, but that was the one which was just perfect.
How much was Ariana, played by Heidi James, lifted directly from Peeps in the LVG?
Oh, yes. Well, the wonderful goth girl Ariana, the wannabe vampire character, it basically is exactly what a lot of the people down the LVG were like. You're really enthusiastic about vampires, over enthusiastic about vampires, wanting to be a vampire. I was like that as well, so I'm not being critical here. Everyone had their fake fangs and they'd put them in and they would go down and socialize. But what was fun is that we used to have these conversations where different people would be talking about vampires and they would be arguing as if they knew more about vampirism than somebody else. So you'd have these in-depth discussions and people would be arguing like the finer points of vampirism. And I witnessed a lot of these conversations but done by people beautifully dressed with great makeup and corsets and really, really alluring and seductive kind of people. So there was something really magical about that. And also, once again, it was something that amused me. And I thought one of the scenes I thought, imagine if you had someone from the LVG talking to a real vampire, trying to explain to a real vampire what vampirism is like. And I just thought that this is a great idea for a scene. So literally that wrote itself just from my experience of going down to the LVG and having those conversations and seeing those conversations. So it was just, once again, candy from a baby, really, that. And also, but Heidi Jones played Ariana beautifully, and she's got that thing about her. And she's genuinely entranced by Lilith as well. And that's that thing. I wanted that idea of Lilith to have this mesmerism, which is less used in vampire films. But I wanted to feel that she does influence people around her. She's very mesmerizing. And slowly she's seducing Ariana, even though Ariana doesn't realize it. Ariana thinks she's pushing her, but it's actually Lilith drawing her because she decides that she's going to give her a beautiful death, but even though she doesn't agree with her.
When you made the film, vampire was working and the vampire hired assassin, as you were saying, was not a known trope. Was Underworld with the latex-clad vampire assassin derived from Razorblade Smile?
Previously to Razorblade Smile, there was no rubber-clad vampire assassins. Underworld, brilliantly played by Kate Beckinsale, who's beautiful, and she's fantastic as the role of Selene, was 4 years later. But, well, in fact, we shot Razorblade Smile in 1996. So by 2002, when Underworld came out, that was actually 6 years later. So we were quite ahead of the curve on that look. And when Razorblade Smile got released, because we had a cinema release in it, and it got released around the world, and we had a huge amount of press and all the film magazines, all of the horror magazines, all newspapers. So we had a campaign on the London Underground. We had the massive, full-size, massive posters, about 8-foot tall posters, and we had posters all around London. We had in cinemas, the quads. So we certainly were the first vampire film to bring rubber into, but the fact that she's a vampire assassin, kind of, Selene in Underworld is essentially the same character. She's a female vampire assassin. Of course, they then wrapped it up in a Romeo and Juliet story and added in the lichens, the whole werewolf love story thing. And that's not something that we did, but certainly the look. I think it would be hard to dispute that somebody on Underworld was. We're not directly accusing them, but we know what it's like when costume designers put the mood board together or a director goes, oh, this is a good look. And Len Wiseman certainly had a big, successful franchise. I didn't with Razorblade Smile. So I took it as an honor that I do believe we genuinely influenced that movie visually and costume-wise, for sure. But also the character. I mean, if you look at the UK video sleeve and she's got the whole 2 guns down, replace the background and put the moon in, and it's essentially exactly the same shot.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned your poster on the tubes and everything. And where were you the first time you saw the poster for the first Underworld with the exact same pose, with the 2 guns, you literally could superimpose them and they are the same thing.
Of course, when I saw the trailer for Underworld and being into vampires, I heard about it. And as soon as I saw some stills in the trailer, I thought, Selene basically looks like a bit like Lilith. I mean, Selene is almost a very similar name to Lilith. So, of course, I went to see it, and I would have seen the poster in the cinema. I think that the portrait poster, which is the one with the 2 guns, that portrait one was used on the video sleeve. So the video sleeve and the Razorblade Smile video sleeve have that same pose. So I'm not sure I think they might have used a different image on the quad. When I saw the video sleeve, but already I could see when I saw the trailer. I know I went and saw the film and I loved it, but I thought, yeah, they've definitely been influenced by Libra Silver because they've basically stolen the visual, which I would have done as well, because clearly it's a great image.
And the concept of the assassin.
Oh yeah, but the concept of being a vampire, a female vampire assassin, is a kick-ass and beautiful, and even Kate Beckinsale's look is like Lilith. Like it's so similar if you look at it. So. Like I say, I'm honoured. I just wish somebody had asked me to do the Underworld film.
It's interesting because usually big budget films then proliferate a lot of films in their ilk. And this was the other way around.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that pretty much exploitation type film history. It's always the little guys, the small budget people ripping off ideas from the big guys, and they try and do like a low budget version of a bigger budget film, kind of like Andy the Sedaris trying to do a James Bond film, something like that. Well, with this, it was the absolute reverse of that, which is kind of unusual. And once again, it's a compliment to how good that we made the image and the character, how compelling those elements were. So yeah, I mean, what can you say on that? I mean, it's kind of mind blowing that happened, but I'm glad that we did actually have some kind of cultural influence beyond the scope of what most people would have thought. And actually, Juliet, not really a bugbear, but it's something that has annoyed me over the years, especially with the internet. The amount of times I get people saying that Razorblade Smile is a rip-off of Underworld and Blade as well. But Razorblade Smile was made years before those films. And this is something which really is annoying because it's assumed that I've ripped off them. And people who are coming to this now will think, oh, it's an Underworld ripoff. But it'd be nice for your audience certainly to know that Razorblade Smile planted is flagged in there firmly beforehand. And, certainly in the Blu-ray and extras and stuff, it's discussed by a lot of people about those influences as well. But thank you for bringing that up. I'm really pleased that you mentioned that.
Absolutely. Can you discuss the Lilith Silver-inspired character in Fallout 4?
Once again, this was something that was brought to my attention by a friend of mine who's also a filmmaker, a lovely girl called Emma Dark, who I interviewed, and she made her film, which was influenced by Lilith Silver and Razorblade Smile. But she said, I was interviewing her for the extras, and she said, Jake, there was a mod in Fallout 4 that had Lilith Silver. I was aware of Fallout, but I'd never played Fallout 4. So I went online and took a look, and somebody had posted the Lilith Silver mod, and Lilith Silver, it's fantastic. And the fact that it's still influencing stuff this far down the track, and it wasn't called the Underworld Celine mod, it was called Lilith Silver. So fuck you, Underworld. That was just a really lovely, crazy little delightful discovery seeping into pop culture. Razorblade Smile, Lilith Silver seeping away like a pool of blood enveloping all around her.
Can you tell us about the comic book as well?
This was another wonderful thing that came off the back of Razorblade Smile. There was an independently produced comic book in the UK, which ran for about 5 or 6 years, called Usher. And it was an anthology horror comic. So there was lots of different strips in the comics, but one of the guys who's a writer on the comic, a guy called Paul Rogers, he came and met me at one of the London Vampire Group events. And he had seen Razorblade Smile. He went to the very first premiere screenings that we had at the National Film Theatre, the BFI, South Bank, which was so bizarre because we were at the legitimate film industry. That's where we had our screening. And this writer, Paul Rogers, he came to that screening and he loved it so much. And he was inspired by it, and he wanted to do a comic strip based on Lilith Silver. So he tracked me down and came to one of the London Vampire Group events, and he literally got me and pitched me that he wanted to do this Lilith Silver comic. And I was like, fuck yes. Look, of course I want to see a Lilith Silver comic. And I was amazed that I'd created this character and somebody else wanted to do something with it. So it felt like, once again, I got that right. So basically he then went away and he found an artist, a guy called John Gallagher, who's the guy that ran Usher magazine. And I thought he did an amazing job of drawing Eileen, and he subsequently became friends with Eileen and does a lot of artwork for her over the years as well. For her, but Eileen is also in bands and she's a musician and she's got album artwork. So John does most of her music artwork for her. So yeah, all of a sudden, they started producing this great comic book called Dark God Rising, and it carries on exactly after Razorblade Smile, and it's got all of the characters we love. It's got Sephane, it's got Lilith, and it even manages to bring back Ariana, which is fantastic because she actually then becomes to become a vampire. And there's a really interesting way they brought her back, but there's this all kind of Lovecraftian Cthulhu style madness happening, and it's a really great idea, and it's really great fun. It's proper like kind of exploitation. It feels like a movie, and they really kind of nailed the character in the same way I did. She's very playful, she's very funny, and it's just great. So yeah, there's this comic strip, and they did it for 6 years, but unfortunately the comic then had to fold. If people get a chance to see it and read it, they should. It's on the UK release of the upcoming Blu-ray and UHD. People can see it on there, and there's an extra all about that. Once again, I was just honoured. I mean, there's a comic book of Razorblade Smile. Jake West, Lilith Silver, amazing.
Can you pluck some adjectives that you think best distill the movie?
Gosh, okay, let's see. Subversive, fun, extreme, seductive, violent, unexpected, surprising, outrageous. Yeah, definitely inspiring, amusing, tragic, hilarious, horrific, and bloody great fun.
I think the words that come to mind first for me would be subversive, punk, fun, erotic, anarchic, touching. It's got all the spectrum.
Oh, thank you. Well, I agree with all of you. But yeah, I definitely feel that we're on the same page with this, Juliet.
So your trailer also played on the telly, isn't that right?
Yeah, I believe back in those days when you were launching a film and it was playing in cinemas, the only way people knew that it was going to be playing in a cinema is if you had a local newspaper ads. So we had ads in like Time Out magazine, and we had ads on the London Underground and the Tube. And if we knew it was in certain regional cinemas, they would put local ads in the press. But the other way of getting the film out was obviously trailer in the cinema and some TV spots. Once again, TV spots were very expensive, so there weren't loads of them. But because we had manga backing it, they did. I think certainly for the London region, they did a few little TV spots, which was amazing. It was just a way of getting the word out. I mean, obviously now we would use the internet, but the internet wasn't really a thing then, or it was just beginning to start. I mean, I don't think I had even had an email account then. Although we did predict video calling with the Teal Pilgrim in that scene where. Because at the time, people were going, oh, that's not realistic. You can't have a video call on a computer. And I was like, yeah, but she's a vampire. She's got better tech.
What was it like for you seeing the trailers on telly and also the posters in the Tube? How surreal was that?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I've got photos of me with the posters on the Tube. And
because it's your first film, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I shot it when I was 26. I was 28 when it came out in 98. And being in your 20s, seeing your film poster on the Underground and the cinema and a TV ad. I mean, it was unbelievable. And all of a sudden around London, people were phoning me up going, Jake, I've just seen, go to like Kentish Town Tube, or it's at Camden Tube. Oh, it's at Islington. And so people were spotting it and they were taking pictures of it. And obviously most of the people I knew, we were all into vampire films and stuff like that. So there was a real frisson of excitement about it. For them, it seemed like it had taken forever from shooting this thing to actually coming out. For them, it felt like nothing had happened for nearly 2 years. For them, it was more of a surprise. Actually, for me, I'd been working on it.
Slaving away.
Yeah.
Welcome to independent filmmaking. Welcome to that experience. Yeah.
Exactly. For me, I mean, I've been climbing Everest all that time and I'd finally got to the top and they didn't realize. So when I came down and it started spreading out, it was just incredible. And like I say, being in your 20s and getting your first feature film out, it's an incredible thing. It's kind of like losing your virginity for the second time. It's that good.
So tell us about the Bloodstone magazine inaugural issue. It was carried at Forbidden Planet, Virgin Megastores, comic book shops. It was a big, big deal, and love to hear about that.
Bloodstone magazine was set up by a guy who I mentioned, Louis Ravensfield, and Louis was one of the guys who was one of the main sort of leading lights down at the London Vampire Group, and he started all these Vampiria events. And he decided that he also wanted to do a vampire magazine, and he decided to launch this in 1997 while I was still editing Razorblade Smile. And basically he got in touch with me and he said, look, I'm doing like a test issue. We're calling it Bloodstone issue 0. It wasn't even issue 1. So just to see whether they would be interested in it. He said, look, this is going to be like a proper magazine, except it's going to be for vampires. So it's going to have all the stuff you would expect in a normal magazine, like a news page about upcoming films or TV, comics, books. And it's going to have an agony aunt. It's going to have like a horoscope, but it's all going to be aimed at people into vampires. So, and articles and interviews with people involved with vampire films and vampire sort of the scene, whether it's fashion, people making fangs and selling them, because this vampire scene had become a much bigger thing at that point. He knew that I'd been to Cannes with my trailer, so I told him down at the LVG and said, look, I've got this trailer and do you want to have a look at it? So I sent it to him, and then he came back, and because he knew he was an Eileen Daly fan, he loved Eileen anyway. He knew her work previous to that. And he was like, oh my God, this literally just blew me away. Have you got any photos of Eileen that as Lilith Silver? That I want to put it on the front of the magazine, and I want to do a massive article all about the making of the film. Even though I'd only done a promo and a trailer, it was still in editing, so it wasn't 100% finished. He was planning that and planning the Vampiria events.
Yeah.
So he said, we'll show the trailer at the Vampiria event. We will release issue 0. So that came out in 1997. And then in 1998, for Vampiria 2, and Bloodstone magazine's on about at issue 5 or something by that point, he said, right, Razorblade Smile was just coming out at the same time he was doing Vampiria 2. So we then won a bunch of vampire Oscars.
I wanted to ask you about that.
That year, we won 3 vampire Oscars. And yeah, for your listeners, this is a statuette of a resplendent vampire woman with kind of wings, arms outstretched and hissing at us with lovely set of fangs. So basically, he kept on covering the progress in Bloodstone magazine from 1997 to 1998. And then obviously the film came out in 98, which tied in with Vampiria. We won the awards, and then he did his big reviews. And so literally Louis Ravensfield was a massive supporter of the film. And he was doing his own thing and creating this vampire magazine. And we were friends. And for him, it was something that he really loved. And once again, he's in the film, in the Transylvania scene. And yeah, once again, it was just real luck that was happening at that time. And then another vampire magazine started, Bite Me magazine, and they did an article of Eileen on the front. They did a whole front page cover with Eileen. I don't know, this was just a bit of magic timing. And then after all of that, they would just cover Buffy.
And you were covered in a lot of the mainstream press as well.
Yes, yeah, we were covered in the mainstream press. We were covered in newspapers, all of the big horror magazines like Fangoria and Shivers and Starburst and Total Film. Empire, we even did a review. I'm not sure it was their cup of tea. But because it was released in cinemas, it had to be covered. It was an official cinema release on October the 30th, 1998. And all films got covered and got reviewed in all the newspapers at that point, which meant that we got very snotty reviews in kind of like the quality newspapers like The Guardian and The Times and The Telegraph, whose readership were really not into low-budget subversive, punky vampire movies.
Genre at all, even at that time. Genre was sort of the bastard child more so than now, where it really is the thing that drives so much of box office.
It was absolutely the bastard child. And those critics, not only did they hate they hate horror films, and this is 1998, because there have been no proper British horror films for 20 years or so, and that some kind of upstart, like 20-year-old making a vampire film for £20,000.
They want to put you in your place. And
which in their view it's not even a proper film because it was so low budget for them. And they didn't come from the joy of watching exploitation films and watching video nasties. And they thought all of that stuff was reprehensible. So their reaction was actually very visceral and very angry towards the film.
Which is good because it's a badge of honor, right? It really is kind of that badge of honor of,
oh yeah, I mean, if
you're not the right audience for it.
Yeah, it's a badge of honor to get a 1-star review from the Telegraph. But at the time, I mean, it was quite shocking for me because it was everywhere. Literally, and it's like, oh, you've just got a really shit review in the Times. So what can I do? But the magazines that appreciated for what it was, the ones that were more supportive, like SFX magazine, Total Film, Fangoria, then all of the underground press, there were magazines like Samhain and Flesh and Blood, these kind of more underground publications. And that's really where, once the audience was at the right level, I mean, look, of course, anyone going to the cinema expecting to see a Hollywood sort of style movie, and then if you don't know what this film is, kind of seeing a movie made for 20 grand, it's probably a bit shocking for them, for that audience, because normally a film like that would never be on at the cinema outside of a festival.
But also your film doesn't look like it was made for 20 grand. It really,
thank you.
And you did beg, borrow, and steal so many favors in it, which is a lot of what independent filmmaking is.
Oh, of course.
The actual value is probably so much more than that anyway, even though it's still a small budget compared to a big Hollywood movie.
The cinema release was a way to platform it and really get the reviews and get it out there. And so we got into the public consciousness, but we needed to find the right audience for the people who are really going to love it.
Yeah. Don't you also think when you're doing something that's outside of the box and subversive, that you are gonna activate anger in people? And that's part of being a filmmaker and a storyteller, is you do want to push some of those buttons.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's part of why I'm still like a sort of goth punk now and why I've never grown up. It's all of those things. I definitely am happy to people to get annoyed by something because this is how I live my life. And I don't want to compromise on that side of it. And I don't feel the need to fit in and conform in a way which a lot of other people do. And I'm very lucky to be able to just about get by hanging on by the skin of my fucking nails to actually be able to live this lifestyle where I can just about make a living doing what I love. And that really does give you a very different perspective on the world and how you want to be in it. So
yes.
So absolutely.
And to some degree, if you're making people angry, you're stirring up emotion, which means that they're affected by what you're making.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting that even if somebody really hates something, it's having an effect on them.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's the first time I had a feature film out, so I hadn't developed probably a thicker skin at that point. Nowadays, I've got a lot more Teflon, kind of like a lot more kind of armor because I'm used to it. But in an age before the internet, I mean, not many people get people slagging their films off in a national newspaper and stuff like that. So partially it was funny. And then there's other bits where you feel a bit depressed.
Of course, it's your baby.
I've spent the last like X years making this film just to be told it's a piece of shit. But obviously I can see the funny side with certain things. And this is part of the course of filmmaking. And it's something that you have to go through. It is a bit of a rebirth from being a person who's made just some short films to making a feature film, and then the level of exposure that gets, certainly at a time when that year in British cinemas, there was only like 20 British films which were released in cinemas. And that's about all of the British films that got made, because you had to shoot on film to get a cinema release. And I was the only horror film. And the rest was like sort of Ken Loach and Michael Winterbottom and stuff like that.
To be continued.